Good morning, everyone. On behalf of everyone at the CREST Network, my name is Bill Gino, and I'd like to welcome you to this morning's webinar. Uh, this is just going to be another question and answer session. Every month, Dick Wagner and I get a whole bunch of inquiries from CREST members, non-CREST members about certain topics. And we always feel it's very helpful to share those questions and our answers with the vast majority of you guys, because many of you have the same questions. So we really enjoy presenting you with these questions each month. Unfortunately, Dick has not been feeling too well, and we want to save all his strength and energy for our clients. So I will be handling this one solo today. So let's get right to it. The first question is, I see the initials SCRT, RIA, and MCRA in the industry. What do they mean? That's actually a really good question, because a lot of times they get thrown out. When I came into the industry about a dozen years ago, after working on Wall Street, one of the things I found very interesting was I heard a heck of a lot about the SCRT and the IRCRC and the RIA, and everybody assumed that I knew what those letters meant. So it's really important to make sure we refresh this for people, even if they've been in the industry a little while. They may even have heard these letters before, but don't know what these groups do. Well, the SCRT, as you can see on the picture there, it says the Society of Cleaning and Restoration Technicians. The MCRA is the Midwest Cleaning and Restoration Association, and RIA is the Restoration Industry Association. These are basically trade groups or trade associations. They're groupings of individual business owners, and they're what we call cooperatives or collectives, and they're companies that get together for a common purpose. Basically, it's to be able to unify our message, to be able to have a louder voice, and to try to make sure that our side of what we do out there is heard within the industry. It's a very important concept. In just about every business, you'll see that there are trade organizations. Some might look like unions for workers. Some might look like, B2B type groups that you might belong to. In our industry, the SCRT, MCRA, those are the types of groups that provide those services for restoration owners. If you're not part of a franchise, you might find it very difficult to find a place that has your intentions and your voice there. So one of the things we talk about all the time is that it is important for you to keep a good perspective, not just keeping your head down and doing your work within your own business and within your own neighborhood, but it's also really important to have a good perspective on what's happening regionally and nationally. A great way to do that is to join one of these organizations. Dick and I happen to be very partial to the SCRT. We are both board members. As a matter of fact, we are very proud that Dick Wagner is the president of the SCRT. And as such, we are very pleased to be able to give back to the industry in such a great advocacy way. I'm the treasurer of the organization as well. We've got several hundred members spread out throughout the country, basically in all four corners of the country. So it is a very diverse group of restorers, and it's a very active group. We have many chapters that go on all throughout the country. And if you have any questions about possibly joining the SRT or any interest in this or any other trade organization, please feel free to reach out to Dick or myself, and we can steer you in that direction. We are so much believers in the SCRT that we actually, for members in the CREST network at the Elite Plus or the Elite level or the Prime Plus level, we actually include an SCRT annual membership as part of their CREST membership. That's how much we believe in the strength and power of the SCRT. So understand, when you see those initials, they're usually trade organizations. The RIA, you may have heard of, they put on a convention every year. There's one coming up, I believe it's in June down in Orlando. And they are very much an advocacy group. They've developed a lot of strength over the last few years. And Dick and I, as members of the CREST network, we have made the CREST network a member of the RIA as well. So we are true practicers of what we're preaching, and that we do believe that there's a lot of strength in what's going on in the industry and in collaborative effort So we are very much involved in and believers in the concept of trade organizations. And we hope that you will be too. Next question we got, and I actually got this question twice from two different CREST members in the last 48 hours. So I decided to throw it on here because it seems to be a big topic. Why can't I talk to my client about their insurance policy? Guys, for years, restorers have been doing just that. We've been trying to help the client navigate through these terrible processes. And because we do it hundreds of times a year, and they've done it once in the last 20 years, if they're lucky, we want to be able to impart some wisdom we have. And because we know that we hear things about what's in a policy and we know what's covered and what's not, we feel like we want to help by sharing that information with them. Well, it's a really, really big problem if we do that, because in most states and in most jurisdictions, it's actually illegal for us to opine or make any kind of interpretations about their insurance policy. An insurance policy between an insurance company and the insured is actually a legal binding contract. In exchange for paying a premium, that insured is entitled to certain things within that contract. And as with most contracts, there are only a handful of individuals who are ever allowed to interpret the language in that contract. We are excluded as a party who can do that. The only people in most states who are allowed to interpret insurance policies are, number one, the brokers or agents who actually wrote the policies and gave them to their clients. Number two would be any lawyer, because obviously if there's a legal contract, lawyers are allowed to discern and distinguish and interpret such contracts. And the third party are what are known as public adjusters. Most of you have heard of public adjusters. If you haven't, they're basically adjusters that only work for the insured, not for the carrier. The adjusters we deal with on a daily basis are not public adjusters. They're independent adjusters, or they're house adjusters, or they're desk adjusters, but they're insurance adjusters that work for the carriers. Yes, they're allowed to interpret as well. That's what they do for a living. But on our side of the fence, for our clients, there's only three entities in most states that can do that. And that's public adjusters, brokers and agents, and lawyers. We are excluded from that list. So do yourself a favor. Do not put yourself in a position like this gentleman in the photo of showing somebody their policy and saying, hey, here, it clearly states you should be covered because this loss is this type of language and that's what this means. Don't do that. I have actually heard true stories that in many states, when the carriers find out that the restoration companies are making such interpretations with their clients, they are reporting them to the commissioner of insurance as being someone who is violating the rules about insurance policy interpretation. They are then receiving notices from the government that they're going to be fined and or prosecuted. Most of the times right now, it's resulting in fines, but those fines are substantial. They're $25,000, $30,000, $50,000 fines. It's really not worth it, guys. You have two options here. Number one, your first option should always be, if there's a question of coverage, you tell your clients to enlist the aid of their broker or agent. That person wrote the policy or sold them the policy. That person should know what's in the policy. It accomplishes two things for you if you let the broker or agent get involved. Number one, it keeps you out of the loop. It brings another professional in. That's a really important first step, so you can't find yourself being obligated in any way legally. The second way it really helps is you're actually pitting the insurance company against itself. Let me explain that for a second. Most of the times, the broker or the agent is going to try to find a way where there is adequate coverage for the loss. Let's just say the sump pump backed up. Now, did the sump pump back up because there was an electrical failure, or did it back up because the line is clogged. Those are two different things. One could be, well, sump pump failures are excluded. The other could be, well, the sump pump really was never going to work in the first place because the line was blocked. One could be a coverage issue and one could not be a coverage issue. Don't be the one to determine that. Let your broker or agent get involved. And because they're going to try their best to find coverage, many times they're going to be fighting against their own company's house adjusters who are going to be fighting to decline coverage. Not that adjusters' number one rule is to decline coverage, but the reality is that many times, if it's a gray area, they will side with the company, which is, well, that doesn't look like it's a covered loss. So it's really important sometimes if you can have an ally fighting against the carrier who's actually part of the process. It's no longer you, the homeowner, and the homeowner really not trusting you fighting against the insurance company. Now it's the homeowner and their broker or agent who they really, really do trust, and you all on one side and the adjuster on the other. It gives you a lot of strength. The second suggestion I would make, and it has to be on losses that are much more substantial and that are basically told that they are not covered at all, not just a small like exclusion or a little area of confusion, but let's call it a larger loss, 20, 30, 50,000, and there's no coverage. I would actually recommend at that point that you guys think about advising your client to hire a public adjuster. Yes, I know that sometimes public adjusters are dirty words for restorers because we all have horror stories about public adjusters being involved on our losses and then getting a nice settlement for the homeowner and telling the homeowner to, oh, you could do whatever you want now. You've got the money. You can hire whoever you want. And then the homeowner kind of kicks us off and brings on their Uncle Jerry and their cousin Vinny to do the work. And we want to avoid that mindset. Those are few and far between. Most public adjusters do a really good job of protecting the interest of the client and don't get involved too much on the actual work side of it. If you're the one who actually suggests them coming in, you also have a better stance with them and they kind of are going to feel obligated not to get you thrown off that job if they are so inclined. But the larger the job, it makes more sense to bring in a public adjuster. And let me give you the reason why I say public adjuster as opposed to lawyer. Most lawyers for issues like I just described, the 30 to 50,000, they're either not going to bill on an hourly rate, they're going to bill on a percentage of the loss, which is going to be about a third. Or if they do bill on an hourly rate, that hourly rate, by the time they're all said and done, is going to exceed what the public adjuster's rate usually is. And in most jurisdictions, for jobs of that size, the public adjuster will work for anywhere from 10 to 15% of the claim, much more reasonably than a lawyer working for a third. I'm not saying that lawyers aren't necessary, but a lot of times the lawyers usually would only come into play if there's some sort of punitive damage that you can do. If you can literally make a case, if the client can make a case where the lawyer has to be involved because the insurance company really went out of their way to screw me, then that's a situation where a lawyer would have to get involved because then there's other things at bay than just coverage. So let's just remember that. Let's always think first and foremost, invite the broker or the agent into the process. It's really going to help us. Not to mention, if Dick were on right now, he'd also tell you it's a great way to introduce yourself to the broker and agent, and they become a new marketing opportunity for you. So it's a really great, and you know what? We'll probably do an entire session on that, on how to turn your production processes and issues into great marketing opportunities. But I'll let Dick handle that because he's obviously much more adept at speaking about that. Just remember, don't talk coverage. When should I raise my prices? My answer is going to be today. You should always raise your prices under several circumstances. Your price should always be determined by basically two or three things. What is your competition pricing at? What is the level of your quality compared to your competition? And then what is your cost of operating? And not necessarily in that order. If you're the best in your industry and you know that, and all your competition in your area is far inferior to you, why shouldn't you charge more? I know, here's the line. Well, everybody uses Xactimate. The insurance company tells me that they only pay Xactimate. Well, you know what? You have to really get aggressive about how you define your services. If you truly are the best, and if you truly have the best people, there's a really good chance that it's costing you more to keep your best people around than it would be if you're just hiring run-of-the-mill people and you're not giving them a lot of training and support and you're not caring about your end product. Well, part of your fees and part of your pricing should be related to what it's costing you to do your business. If you're paying your technicians $20, $22, $23 an hour, and everybody else in your area is paying 17 or 18, well, guess what? Your cost of operating is much higher than theirs. So now think about it. Why would you charge the same Xactimate rates as someone else? I'm not saying you can't make money using Xactimate. I'm just saying that there are reasons why your prices should be higher. And the number one should be if your quality is better, if your cost of doing business is higher. Those are 1 and 1A, I'll say. Number 3 should be, well, if your competition's prices are the same as yours and you're better, you have a basis to raise. If your competition's prices are higher than yours and you're equal to or better than them, you can also raise. Now, that applies to mitigation because even though there's incredible amounts of inflation going on right now, there hasn't been a ton of it that's hit the mitigation side. Yes, we're paying a little bit more for plastic and obviously PPE, but we're also getting to charge now for PPE on a much greater scale thanks to COVID than we were. Where we're really feeling it in this industry is if we're what I call a turnkey or a full service company. If you're providing content services, if you're providing recon services, the price of certain things that you're functioning with, like lumber and like your boxes and any kind of materials that you're using for contents, those prices are skyrocketing right now. I know on 2 clients I'm working with, their entire price list for contents just went up by 15% in the last month. That's a significant increase in the cost of doing your business. That could really affect your bottom line if you don't make sure that that's reflected in your pricing going forward. I don't know if Xactimate has caught up to that yet. We're going to have to take a look when when June's list comes out to make sure that those prices have come up. I know for a fact that on the reconstruction side, Xactimate's pricing on lumber, especially plywood, has not caught up with what's going on out in the industry. The price of plywood has more than doubled in many metropolitan areas, and the scarcity is really, really high. And I know that the price of plywood within Xactimate has not doubled. And again, this is not a let's beat up on Xactimate session. There's plenty of places you can find on the internet to do that. This is just real dollars and cents reality. You have to go through your program every single month. And you have to look at what Xactimate's giving you for that sheet of 4x8 half-inch plywood and make sure that you're getting an appropriate amount, not just for what you're paying for it. But remember, your price for materials includes the cost of going and picking it up, storing it, and then bringing it to the job site. So you have to have a margin in there that's more than just saying, well, it costs me $78 for a sheet and they've got $78 in there in Xactimate, I'm okay. You're not okay. It's costing you money, either delivery charges or picking it up and then dropping it off at your job site. None of that's included anywhere else except in the material cost itself. You really need to understand that. So when I say raise your prices today, I'm fairly confident that if you're using Xactimate and you're not already adjusting your prices, you aren't making the money that you need to make. You're actually losing money relative to where you were in January. And even if you are adjusting your prices, most of us adjust our prices like on an every 3 to 6 month basis. We really need to be looking at our price list every single month. They publish that new price list on the first of the month. Our number one priority for anybody who's doing our estimating or our invoice preparation, their first job on the first of the month should be to scour that list and go through the 50 to 100 most used items. And also make sure you're checking that labor. Like we talked about, earlier, if you're paying your guys more, check that labor rate. Make sure that that labor rate is high enough for you to justify what you're paying your guys. And don't say, well, they're giving me $43 for a restoration technician, so that's plenty. If you're paying somebody $23, $24 an hour, by the time you get done with the labor burden and the labor overhead, you're probably really close to, if not exceeding that number. Look through Xactimate. They break it down. They tell you if it's $43, they tell you exactly how much of that is the hourly wage. If you're not at least meeting that number, you're losing money every hour you send your guys out. I'm not teasing you. This isn't, oh, Billy's just saying this and no, you're literally losing money. Every time they work, it might be costing you $45 and you're only getting 43. Don't operate like that. Don't sit there and say, well, the program probably has enough in there. Be very, very strong and strong-willed and strong-minded about being aggressive on your pricing. Then when it comes time to talk to the adjusters, we can have a separate conversation about how do we defend changing our pricing. It's not as hard as you think, guys. It's happening all over the country. Thousands of restorers are charging customized pricing within Xactimate and getting paid for it. Thousands. Don't be afraid to raise your prices as long as you can justify the price raise. Dick has heard this a lot, and it's what we call a built-in excuse for guys who don't want to put in the work. My market is so small. How can I get more business? Because a lot of times they'll come to the RMS class or they'll hire Dick and they'll become a member of the CREST network, and then we'll start working with them. And they'll say to us, well, you've got clients in the big cities and you've got a client who's got, for instance, here in Atlanta, our company here in Atlanta, there's 6.5 million people who live within an hour's drive of the office here in Atlanta. Oh, that's an easy market. You can easily be successful there, but I've only got 300,000 people in my market. So how can I be successful? Well, it is really, really all about how much work you're willing to put in. Think about it this way, and I'm not meaning to make light of anybody's plight if you're in a really small market. But we've all heard the expression, big fish in a small pond, small fish in a big pond. It's really difficult in Atlanta to say, well, the scale means I'm automatically going to do more business. Yes, the opportunity is there, but you know what else is there? The competition. If Atlanta's got 6.5 million people, but it's got 400 restoration companies, that's one restoration company for every 15,000 people. Remember that ratio. If you're in a really small market that within a 1-hour drive, you can only get to 300,000 people. But your market is so small, so there's not a lot of interest, and there's only 10 restorers. That means there's one restorer for every 30,000 people. See the difference? We're talking about apples and oranges. The competition in the larger markets is usually very intense. And that competition leads to you having to work differently in order to capture what I would call a significant amount of market share to make it worthwhile. Over the course of time, and when I say time, I mean over years and years and years, the actuarial percentage of losses is about the same. The same number of losses happen per 100,000, whether you're in a small area or a dense area. It really doesn't change all that much. So again, it's all about how aggressive do you want to be? In Atlanta, there's hundreds and hundreds of plumbing companies. So if you want water damage work and you're going after plumbing companies, you have to be able to get a lot of plumbing companies to be able to throw you work to make yourself successful. But you're also up against hundreds of other restorers, and those restorers probably are playing different games than you are, and it might be really difficult to make inroads into some of those companies. In the smaller markets, you might actually have friendships with a lot of those plumbers where it's a lot easier for you to develop those relationships. Is it possible that they're getting fewer losses than in the big areas? Yeah, it's possible. But again, markets dictate how many plumbers can survive in a given market. So if there's 1 million people in a market, there's X number of plumbers. If there's 2 million people, market psychology dictates there's probably twice as many, or those companies are twice as big. So it's all about ratios. So don't make the excuse that you're in a small market. The small market excuse only works to allow you not to work as hard as the guy in the big market. It's not like the guy in the big market says to himself, well, I've got 6 million people, I'm going to get every loss. We always tell our guys, well, if you're in a market that has 3,000 water losses a month, which is a multi-million person population market, and there's 3,000 water losses a month, all I want you to do is get 1% of them. Because if you get 1% water loss out of 3,000, you're going to get 30 water losses. That's a job every single day. You're in an extremely successful water damage company if you're getting 1 water loss a day. Most of us in our market will kill for that. But that's all we tell them. So if I say to you, in your market, where you've got fewer than hundreds and hundreds of competition, you don't need to get 1%, you need to get a higher percent. So you just have to work harder. You might need to get 10% of your market to be successful, because your market might not have 3,000, but your market might have 300 losses a month. So you might have to work really hard to get 10%. But again, your competition's less, so you might find it not so bad. So don't beat yourself up because your market is so small. Remember, it's a numbers game. And believe it or not, if you've got proper coaching, if you've got really good processes, and you're willing to do the work, you're at a bigger advantage in a small market than our CREST members are in the bigger markets. That's a fact. Work hard. Hard work has never, ever found an excuse. Does CREST offer protected territories like a franchise? This happens a lot. We've actually had a few CREST members join us in the last couple of months, and that's one of the first questions that they ask. Are we like a franchise? Well, we're not like a franchise in that respect, where we give you a protected territory and nobody else is allowed to, quote unquote, do business in your area. But here's what we do when we offer a protected territory. We tell you that the expertise that we provide to you in this differentiation of how to market and do your services, and in the ability for you to be a CREST member and not only get marketing support, but also get some technical support and to get operational support, that what we promise you is that we will not work with any other companies within your protected territory. So if you've got a company that's 5 minutes up the road from you and you're a CREST member, we obligate to you that we won't provide those same services to that member who's 5 minutes away from you. We will limit our CREST memberships just to specific territories. How big are those territories? Generally speaking, a CREST territory makes up a population of about 500,000 people. For some of you, that might only be a half of a county. For others of you, this might be 8 or 10 counties. Again, we've got members all throughout the United States, all 4 corners of the country, and each membership is completely different and custom. It's what we like to say at CREST is what makes us different, is that we are not cookie cutter. We find out what your company needs, and then we conform to the things that your company is going to be able to benefit from the best. We want to make sure that your coaching is very specific to your company. So we will do a protected territory to make sure that the things we're teaching you in your specific region, you can capitalize on to a much higher level. We don't specifically exclude other companies that might be able to do business in your area. For instance, we have a couple of CREST members in the Atlanta area. Atlanta, like I said before, has 6.5 million people in its megalopolis or metropolis. So we don't have just one member representing the 6.5 million people. We have a couple of members. Same with other larger geographic regions. But we make sure that we're still very specific to the coaching needs and wants of each one of those members, even within the specific territory. So it's really more about not worrying about protecting the territory and understanding that what you're getting from the CREST network is more about that personal touch, that personal coaching. Yes, there are a lot of great things that you can learn by coming to the RMS class, which is open to all, but you're not going to get that personal touch that you're going to get by being a CREST member. Just thought I'd throw it out there because it has been something that's been coming up a lot. Do adjusters really look at every line of my invoice? Again, I had about a 45-minute conversation with a CREST member this week because they feel like they're being singled out by their specific insurance company that does a lot of work in their region. And it's very, very interesting to denote why we think adjusters are looking at every line. And guys, know this, they are looking at every line, but they're not looking at every line with a fine-tooth comb the way this gentleman in the photo is. They're not psychoanalyzing and really doing this incredible deep dive into every single thing. They're doing a few things. They're making sure your measurements are correct. They're making sure that the calculations you use for linear footage of base or for square footage of drywall or flooring removal, they're making sure those calculations are accurate. And then they're looking for some specific things that each company says, quote unquote, we don't pay for that, or that's a cost of doing business. Those are the areas where they're always looking to cut. We always put on trip charges. We'll always put on, emergency service call. Many insurance companies say, no, that's a cost for you doing business. Supervisory hours. Oh, we don't pay supervisory hours on mitigation losses for residential. We don't pay for decontamination or PPE under Cat 3. All those sorts of things. Those are really the lines they're looking for. They don't do a deep dive. They look at just a couple of things each time. It's very, very important to understand certain aspects of the business. One of them is, don't take it personally when an adjuster sends back his review of your invoice. We always make a mistake of thinking that the adjuster's after me. No, the adjuster's job is to adjust the claim, to correct mistakes that they view. Are there adjusters who are nitpicky and just out to screw mitigation companies? Yes. Are there mitigation companies who are out to inflate their invoices and screw the insurance companies? Yes. That same ratio is a very fair assessment of what goes on in our industry. If you want to believe that most adjusters are very fair and honest because most restoration companies are fair and honest, that is how you should believe it. If you think most of the people in our industry are crooks, my first question is, why are you even in the industry? That's kind of a really jaded viewpoint. But then you have the right to believe that most adjusters are crooks as well. But the only reason they're crooks is because they're trying to combat this innate fraud that's built into the system. If you're a believer that most of the people on our side do it fairly, and these guys are just being overly hard, understand that they're just being overly hard, but not against you. They're just doing, quote unquote, what they believe to be their job. So let's talk about that in a realistic, sensible fashion. They are adjusting based on parameters that they're given by their own bosses and their own companies. And their own companies are looking to cut our bill by anywhere from 5 to 15%. If they can cut our bill by 5 to 15%, they can actually turn their company around from breaking even to making a profit for the year. That's how much they believe their impact is on our business. But that 5 to 15% off of those bills means a lot to you. So you really have to make sure the easiest way to combat them looking at, quote unquote, every line or doing these deeper dives is the use of what we call the F9. When you put together your invoices, if you're using Xactimate, you put your invoice together, every single line item, you should be able to add a comment or a note. That's what we mean by F9. If you add a note, that takes a lot of the question marks away. If you put in for HEPA vacuuming and you put an F9 note in there that says, well, we removed drywall, and because of the OSHA guidelines, we couldn't sweep up the debris, so we had to HEPA vacuum the debris. HEPA vacuuming is not included in the cleanup part of the line item for drywall. That's a perfectly acceptable explanation, rather than putting nothing and having them come back and say, oh, we don't pay for HEPA vacuuming unless it's a Cat 3. If you give them the explanation ahead of time and anticipate what they're going to say, then you're going to be much more successful in combating those. But they really don't look at every line. They look at some key indicators. Give them as much explanation as you can when they do look at the lines. And I'm telling you, it'll make your job a lot easier in the end. You'll get paid more and you'll get paid faster. What trendy marketing strategies don't work anymore? It's very funny. Dick and I present a 3-day restoration marketing specialist certification class, and it's extremely successful. We've had a huge amount of interest, and we've held 2 classes up till now. We've got about 40 people out there in the restoration industry who have been certified as restoration marketing specialists. And it's amazing when they come to the class and they hear about the things that they're still doing. And some of the things that they're still doing are still not working, and they don't know why, because this is all they know. And some of the things they're doing are things that only were really popular as late as maybe 3 years ago. But now everything changes so quickly. We need to understand that when things change, we have to adapt. This would be much better if Dick were presenting it, but I'm going to roll through it, and maybe Dick will do a whole hour on it in the future. Some of the trendy things that I was able to discover that don't work anymore. Buying email lists. That used to be a really big thing, 10, 15 years ago, when the advent of things like Constant Contact came. Buying an email list was great. You just generically buy a list of 1,500 contacts, and you just send stuff out to those 1,500 contacts. What's your closing ratio going to be? What's your response? What's your answering rate going to be? That used to be really easy to define. Well, you know what? Things are so different now than they were 3, 5, 10, 15 years ago. It's so much better right now to focus on people who are interested in you. So if you've got a way where you can capture let's say people are coming to your website and they're answering questions, or they're clicking several times. If you could find out who those people are and then engage them, they've already showed interest in you. Just think about how much more effective that type of strategy can be, rather than blindly sending out an email to 400 plumbers in your area. That would be a really, really difficult task. Short blog posts. It used to be that blogging was important, but all you needed to do was make sure that you matched keywords. And if you match certain keywords, boom, now all of a sudden your SEO, your search engine optimization, is going to go right to the top. Well, guess what? That doesn't count anymore. When it comes to SEO and what triggers good searches, that changes constantly. Even guys who are in the business will tell you it's a never-ending process. And what worked a month ago doesn't work now. Well, short blog posts don't work anymore. I just read an article that came out of Inc. magazine that said if you don't have at least a 300-word blog, you're not even getting counted towards SEO. The other thing that really doesn't matter is nailing keywords. With the advent of artificial intelligence, there's a lot greater ability on behalf of these search engines now to look for strings of words rather than individual words. So it's more about the intent of what the person is searching for, rather than matching it letter for letter, word for word, keyword for keyword. It's much more about intent. So the blogs that we created 2 years ago, which were 50 to 100 word quick blogs that we put all over the place, now we have to make sure there's a lot more content and it's a lot more specific. That takes us now to generic content. We used to use a lot of generic content. It used to be just fill the pages with a whole bunch of stuff, and that would work. Dick has a great way of great way of referring to this is about us content. And no marketing strategy anymore should be about us. Everything should be about you. Everything should be about the target. Who is your target? And what message do we want to send to the target? So if it's generic content, there's clearly nothing in there that's specific to the person we're marketing to. You know, in our RMS class, Dick goes to great lengths to talk about the difference between marketing to plumbers and marketing to brokers and agents. And it's not just about, well, yeah, you got to say certain. No, it's an entire mindset. So much so, and I'm giving a little bit of the class away, but we actually explain why you shouldn't market to brokers and agents and plumbers on the same day. It's that different. And that's what we mean about don't be generic. You have to make sure you change. About us content was all the rage 10 years ago. That was trendy 10 years ago. Even 5 years ago, it was still acceptable. No longer acceptable, guys. So let's make sure we understand these trendy strategies that were out there that we're all still doing because they worked for us, you know, back in 14. Guess what? They're not working today. And we probably don't even realize they're not working, but that's another discussion for another day. With June approaching, this question has come up many times. What can I do to get ready for hurricane season? Before I actually give you the what can you specifically do step by steps, you need to ask yourself this question. Are you ready and are you capable of doing hurricane work, quote unquote, cat work or cat chasing? Understand two things. When you leave your home base, you're turning away the ability to keep your bread and butter going, and you're putting at risk the very stability of your company long term for the hopes of hitting a home run. If you're not fully capable of functioning at 100% at home, you should not even be considering cat chasing. Let's understand that. I'm going to say it again. If you're not 100% capable of doing 100% of the work at home the same way when you leave, then you shouldn't leave. We're in the business 12 months out of the year. We are developing relationships with lead sources, subcontractors, a whole bunch of referral people. If we abandon them because we're off chasing the shiny object, why should they stick with us the other 11 months? Very, very poor business model. We want to build a business at home, and the only time we want to chase is when there's opportunity for us to enhance our year, not to put anything at risk. Okay, so we've already addressed that, and I'm talking to those of you who are fully confident that you're not going to put anything at risk. What can you do to get ready for hurricane season? The two most important things you need when you go away on hurricanes is you need to have supplies of consumables and you need to have air scrubbers. Don't ever think, oh, I've got a ton of air movers, that's what I'm bringing with me. In most hurricane seasons, the piece of equipment that gets used the least are air movers. In just about every circumstance, by the time you get to start drying the structure out, that structure is under Cat 3 protocol. So you're doing very little air movement. You're doing a lot of air scrubber work and dehumidification. So yes, everybody needs to use, that's pretty much a given. You're probably going to need to rent to use, but let's make sure you've got air scrubbers. But let's make sure you have a lot of consumables. You're going to need a lot of plastic. You're going to need a lot of garbage bags. You're going to want to make sure you've got filters. You're going to need a lot of PPE. You're going to need a lot of water, not just for your workers, but part of being a good servant of the community when you go in to assist after large losses is you want to help people out. So part of helping out is making sure you have enough water, just not for your people, but for them as well. You want to have proper resources. You want to have a ready-made arrangements with other companies who can provide you with labor and equipment. If you don't have those relationships, contact Dick or myself. We work very strongly with Scott Tarpley and DEI. We have the ability to get you as much equipment and as much labor as you need. They are very, very capable people who primarily do this kind of work all the time. They support other restorers on very, very large CAD type responses. So get in touch with us. We can hook you up with Misty or Scott or the right people to be able to take care of you. The third thing you need to do is you need to make sure you've got a war chest of cash. I can't exaggerate this enough. More people's companies go out of business because they cannot afford to keep working both at home and on the road. We all know at home how long it takes for us to get paid. For most of us, God willing, we get paid within 45 days. For some, it's maybe 90 days. When you work in the CATs, don't plan on getting paid for 6 months. And I know I'm scaring the heck out of some of you, and some of you are saying, oh, you're BS. I went and I got my money right away. You know what? If you did, you guys hit the lottery. And understand that the averages don't always work that way. And if anything, you're putting yourselves at greater risk for the next one. It takes most companies a good 6 months to recoup the funds from the CAT work. So many other things come into play. The adjusters, when there's CATs, it takes them a lot longer to get through the invoice and to get through the process and to manage the claims. Many times we're billing for things that might be quote unquote foreign to those adjusters looking at the work. They're not used to seeing so much equipment for so long, or a drying period, or a stabilization period of weeks. So they need to have a lot of understanding. There's going to be a lot of back and forth that goes around. We need to understand that before we go there to work. If we don't have enough cash to support 6 months of operating our company without anything coming in, and operating guys being on the road and paying them what they need to be paid to survive, and taking care of our subs and our providers, like our PPE providers and our garbage can and garbage bag providers and our equipment providers, they're not all just going to sit back and say, oh, don't worry about it. Whenever you get paid, I'll take the money. Then, they're going to want their money in 30 days. So I advise you have a ton of cash available. What's a good measure of cash? Whatever it costs you now to operate your company for 3 months, double it. And that's what I'm saying, exactly what I mean. Look at what your expenses are every 3 months, counting your payroll, what it costs to do business, what it costs to, rent equipment, all that stuff, your rent, your utilities, your insurance, all of that. Basically, what do you spend for a whole year, and cut it in half? That's 6 months of your expenses. You need to have that much cash available. Okay. So resources, expertise, and support staff when you get to the site, and cash. Those are the 3 things that you could do to get ready for hurricane season. It's coming up, guys. It's next week is the official start to the hurricane season. There are already a couple of invests out there. And if you're into the hurricanes, you know what an invest is. If you're not, then you wouldn't know what it is. And if you don't know what an invest is, you shouldn't be chasing hurricanes. It's kind of that simple, but it's right around the corner. Let's make sure we're prepared, and let's make sure we make a real sober decision that before we leave to chase the millions, that we've got everything in our backyard locked up first. To me, that's the most important thing. Keep the singles coming. Don't swing for the fences every single time. Well, that concludes today's webinar. I really want to thank you all for joining us on behalf of everyone here at the CREST Network. I want to thank you. I want to wish Dick all the best as he continues to heal up. And we will be hearing from Dick next week at his normal time on his next webinar. So thank you so much. And please feel free, if one of your questions that you have in your head was not answered this week, make sure you reach out to us, and we'll get it on next month's Q&A session. Thank you so much. And we want to thank you, and have a great day. Bye-bye.